Welcome back. So today we're digging into a series of adventures. So these are unique to me because I've always associated Palladium books with, there were adventures kind of put in the books, but very few of them were adventure modules, right? I mean, one could argue that the Juicer Uprising is this little mini campaign, or obviously the Coalition War was this massive arc. But for the most part, you just gave us a bunch of hook, line, and sinkers, or several adventures at the back of a book. I'm reading through the Cyberworks book right now, and I'm remembering, source book 1 had these like little threads that you could follow through. You really didn't hold the game master's hand at all. You were like, hey, here's a hook, line, and sinker. Go out and run this adventure. So I'm excited to talk about these because obviously I have the Arms of Nargash-Tor. I've run the Arms of Nargash-Tor, but I'm only aware of Valley of the Pharaohs. I've never played it and I've never run it. So why did we get the Arms of Nargash-Tor?
Well, again, in the earlier days, it felt like we should do more adventure type material. But I was also aware, and some of our adventure books kind of proved that to be true. Basically, your best-selling product's going to be your core rule books.
Mm-hmm.
A monster manual, player's guide, game master guide, which we don't do a lot of those for most of our games. A lot of our games are complete in themselves. So, which I like. I don't want people to have to drop $100 just to play the game.
Right.
So there was that. But we also realized that people needed some adventures. So we experimented with doing some adventure books. And, the Arms of Nargash-Tor was our very first adventure book. So one of my friends came up to me and said, hey, I'm done some writing and I love Palladium fantasy. I would love to write an adventure book for it. And I said, great. What did you have in mind? And he whipped up that. I think I came up with the title, The Arms of Nargash-Tor. And it was still early enough. This is like 1983, if I recall correctly. So I was still doing most of the artwork for our books.
Yep.
So I did all or most of the art in that book, and he wrote up this pretty good adventure. I went in and tweaked it a little here and there, but it was great. It was a fun kind of fairy-based, and I love fairies, and he loved fairy folk. So it was a fun adventure.
It's also the only one that, Palladium Books has a form factor today, right? That like Palladium Books always, they kind of got the same uniform size. This is comic book size. Why either the departure or the experiment with the Arms of Nargash-Tor?
Well, again, because it came out so early, Palladium still didn't have a lot of money. So we went with the comic book size format, better paper stock, but it was still just a small stapled, or what in the business they call saddle stitched.
Yep.
It just seemed like the better, smarter, cheaper way to go. So that's what we did. It was only like $5, for an adventure module. I think the going rate back then was probably around 10.
Yeah.
But, I thought this would be cool, and we can whip this out pretty quick and easy, and that's what we did.
How did it do?
It did okay. It wasn't a huge seller. I think we printed 5,000 or 6,000 copies, and we sold those out. And I don't think we reprinted it, but we had already at this point been moving on to other things. So, and as far as some of the other books, why we kind of moved away from adventures is, adventures take a lot of work, a lot of time. You really want to think things through, because you don't want to just throw out something that a game master is going to struggle with. You want to make it easy and fun for the game master to run as much as for the players to enjoy. And also, it was back in a day where I felt like a lot of people were creating their own adventures. So the whole idea of offering adventure hooks and hook, line, and sinkers, which came about 10 years later. Jolly Blackburn actually created the hook, line, and sinker format for Shadis magazine. At one point, he needed some money and said, "Hey, Kev, you want to buy the rights to hook, line, and sinkers for $1,000?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." Oh. And so we did.
So then there's the Valley of the Pharaohs, and the only thing I know about the Valley of the Pharaohs is that it was Palladium's one and only box set. Until is it Terror on the Dark Frontier was kind of the next box set that's been associated with Palladium Books?
No, I would say Robotech RPG Tactics.
Robotech, okay, yeah, Tactics.
Which wasn't really a role-playing game. Right. It was,
but like for role-playing games, it's Valley of the Pharaohs, Savage Rift's Terror on the Dark Frontier. There's about 35 years between those.
Yes, easily.
Now this is not a fantastical adventure, right? This is really Valley of the Pharaohs.
Yeah, so Valley of the Pharaohs was Matt Ballant's idea. As we touched upon in a couple other interviews, I really fell in love with Egyptian mythology. Yeah. And their gods, and it was very, come on, let's face it, Egypt is this land of mystery. Who built the pyramids? Exactly how did they build the pyramids? What the heck is inside the pyramids?
Yeah.
They're always finding these crazy, amazing things. And then I just love the pantheon of deities, and Matthew Ballant also, who wrote our adventure, or not adventure, but who wrote our weapon series, also got into Egyptian mythology in a big way. And he came to me and said, "Kev, I'd like to do a role-playing game that is based in Egyptian myth." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." And man, we put in so much time. We had so much fun with it. That's the box. We had to go the cheap route because we couldn't afford, which was a mistake. We'll talk about those later. But
lessons learned.
That's the box. And, it came with a 50-page booklet. That's the rule book. And, there's all kinds of cool art and background in it. It was quite an undertaking. We also did these 11 by 17 or 8.5 by 14 maps and diagrams. So, you've got Boats of the Nile, the True Pyramid, the Giza Necropolis, the Temple of Hatshepsut, and there's all kinds of, additional maps. We had like 12 of these things.
Yeah.
Maps and diagrams. We had city fortifications and simple fortifications. We had there's even a large character sheet. We had the temple at Karnak, complete with floor plans. We had the step pyramid, complete with layout as far as the exterior, typical houses of the time.
Yeah,
it was pretty comprehensive, and it was a lot of fun to do. I did all 12 of those illustrations. I also did our kind of color map. It's yellow and blue and white mostly, but that was a big fold-out map that came in the box. And we were really excited about it. It was a big undertaking. I keep thinking it came out in 1985, but it was actually 1983. So we're talking, this is the second big game that we did after Palladium Fantasy. And we lost our shirts on it.
Oh, no. What happened?
So we learned a lot of valuable lessons from this. For one, it was too pedestrian, because even though there was some magic and there was some conflict of the supernatural, it was too slice of life, too real world. Okay. So when you compared it to something like Palladium Fantasy, which was our big hot release, or Dungeons and Dragons, or RuneQuest, or virtually anything else out there, it was kind of ho-hum. We just didn't think through the entire, not playability, but the amusement factor. We were so caught up, I think, in the historical aspect of it that we lost sight of what can make this a lot of fun.
Yeah.
For the players. So that was one. It was also a different game system. It was Matt's own game system. And I think people were expecting, the Palladium game system.
Yeah.
That's what our previous publications had been for the most part. And so that didn't go over. I also came to realize that I researched afterwards more that historical games don't generally do that well. It's just a trait of humans, I think. Human beings are into the fantastic, fantasy, the future, science fiction, and the right now. And when you say, hey, this is historical, half of the, hell, 2/3 of the people just shut off.
Just their eyes glaze over and they're like, I didn't like that class in school. I'm going to go back to something else.
You got it. In their minds, history was not a fun thing to take in school, although it could have been and should have been, because there's amazing stuff in history. But yeah, they think of it with this negative school connotation. Mm-hmm. So unless it's something that's truly unique and fun and compelling, like Bushido is a great example of that.
Yes.
I think Kenzer Company's Aces and Eights are an example of that. And then if it's the alternative is, here's a setting you think you know. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to put in these wild twists and make it, something truly unique or bizarre or dangerous or all of the above. And a great example of that is Pinnacle's Deadlands.
Yeah.
I think what was the old game that GDW did? It was like this Victorian age.
Space 1889.
Yeah, Space 1889, exactly. That's another example of that. Although, again, I don't think any of those, with the exception of Deadlands, did huge. I think Space 1889 did well, but It wasn't a big hit. Deadlands was a big hit. So you need to have that kind of thing if you're going to do something based in history.
Yeah.
A great example of that, too, this is why when I was offered. So when Palladium started to take off after Ninja Turtles and Robotech.
Which we'll get to here in the next couple of interviews.
Yes. I was approached by King Features, which I got all excited about. Now, King Features did a lot of newspaper comic strips.
Okay.
And among them was Prince Valiant, one of my favorite of all time.
Yeah.
Mandrake the Magician, which I think was turned into a TV show briefly. There were several others. The Phantom, I love. Phantom. The Phantom's great. Lee Falk's Phantom.
Yeah.
I think Lee Falk also did Mandrake. I loved his writing. He actually did a few novels for the Phantom, and I think a few other things there. Well, in my kid brain, they were great. And so when they called, my knee-jerk reaction was, holy Moses, this is fantastic. Yeah. I want these. I want to get all these licenses. And then I really thought about it. And as much as I love them personally, they really didn't fit the requirements for a role-playing game. Namely, the same problems we had with the Valley of the Pharaohs, you would have with those where there was some magic, and we're talking medieval stuff, and King Arthur in the case of
Prince Valiant.
But all those stories were really tame. It was nothing compared to Dungeons and Dragons or Palladium Fantasy. Yeah. So if you had your choice of playing these other things and slaying dragons and fighting, orc armies and gnolls and wolfen and you're going to pick those other games, not Prince Valiant.
Yeah.
As I think Chaosium found out. Because I think
Chaosium did Prince Valiant.
I think they tried to spice it up. If I recall, that was a diceless game system.
I think it's actually a D2 system, like a coin flip system now. Yeah.
And you know, and when you get into it like Mandrake and the Phantom, it gets even worse because there's one main character.
Mm-hmm.
So who are you, the players, playing? Not everyone can play the Phantom or Mandrake, and you know his buddies are all very secondary. Again, the worlds are very commonplace, very mundane. So it doesn't work. And that was one of the things, a big lesson that I came to learn from Valley of the Pharaohs. So, it was funny because when this tanked, I'm thinking, oh my God, it's just a complete loss here. And I think we came close to making our money back, honestly, but it took years. And I think we printed 5,000 of these and we ended up throwing out like 3,000.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because 10 years later, we're selling, 3 a year. And
it's warehouse space that you've got to pay for.
Right. Well, and, it's just like, what's the point? So, but you can learn from your mistakes. And I think that's really valuable. And my goodness, I mean, we put in so much work, so much energy into that. That was another example of, it doesn't matter how much hard work you put into it. If you don't resonate with your audience, if you don't quite nail it, it's just a misfire. But if you learn from your mistakes, then it wasn't really a mistake. It was a learning experience.
Right. And I think that's one of the things, if you're an aspiring game designer, game author, just know that, like, if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? Just keep coming back to it, keep refining it.
Exactly. Although I do also want to say, sometimes you have to sit back and say, you know what? This was a misfire.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really fit our market. There's other things to do. Sometimes you have to let it go. You have to look at it and say, we did our best, like we always do, but this one didn't work.
Yeah.
And let's not sit down. I mean, yes, work on your abilities, work on your storytelling, figure out what went wrong, and don't do it again. Don't repeat your mistakes. But sometimes it's just toss it out and move forward with your next project. Exactly. I say that because I have seen time after time after time where some small game company comes out with their game and it's got some cool ideas, but it just isn't selling. I mean, it's dead on arrival. And the people, instead of going, well, it was a good first attempt, what do I do next? Instead, they do 5 supplements for a role-playing game that nobody wants.
Yeah.
And then they're completely out of business, or they're so soul crushed, they just give it up.
Yeah.
And don't do that. It's okay to put your best foot forward and fall flat on your face, because sometimes it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You just pick yourself up and move on to the next thing. Learn those lessons and move on. I don't mean to sound preachy, but I just see it time and time again, and it makes me sad.
Perseverance, especially in this industry, whether you want to do it part-time, full-time, freelance, is necessary. There will be feasts, there will be famines, but there is no get in quick scheme.
No.
Especially we're a thriving and wonderful hobby, but in some ways we're still a niche hobby. And
very much.
There are people clamoring, and I mean, I've been asked several times, well, how do you get into the role playing game writing thing? I'm like, I was doing it for free for about 10 years before I first got my first paying gig, and that went. I think the only positive thing I can say about it is I hit my deadlines, which was important. But I mean, that's 10 years of sweat equity that I put in before it actually persevered. You put in a ton of time writing and refining the Palladium fantasy game, and still that couldn't be your first game that you put out. You had to do something else. And then your next game that you put out, Valley of the Pharaohs, did not do well at all. And so there are some people who would look at that and like, hey, I'm 1 for 1, I'm done. They would not have founded a company that has been around for 40 years.
Well, again, my advice is always, if this is what you love, stick to it. Stick to it, and always give it your all. I've seen I see this more with artists than I do with writers, but I've seen a number of freelance artists, not ones that I use, but who look at a job and say, they're only paying me X, so I'm going to only put in so much effort. And that's always a huge mistake, because one, you should always put your best foot forward. How are you going to get better? How are you going to show how good you are? Two, you never know who's watching, who's looking at that, who sees that. When I did the Mechanoids, I did the best I could do. And I get a letter from Mark Miller and one of the co-creators of Traveler. I get a job from Fassoff because of it. I get a job from Steve Jackson Games because of it. I got some other work because of it. So you never know how that's going to work out, who's going to see what you're doing. You always want to put your best face forward, and always do your best, because to do anything less is just a mistake. A lot of these artists who would take these shortcuts, most of them, they're either second rate or, 10 years later, they're no longer doing this, or it's just a hobby, or it's just a sideline. Yeah, absolutely. Even though it failed, I mean, Matt and I are proud of the work we did.
Yeah.
It just, we misread the market. The market wasn't there. And that was one of the huge mistakes. And then we talked about some of the other ones. The fun factor wasn't there. The wow factor wasn't there. But I do want to mention that because it is close to our heart, and it's because it's so rare, because there's only like 1,500 or 2,000 ever got sold. It is a huge collectible these days. I mean, people pay $500-$600 for a copy of Valley of the Pharaohs. It's so rare. I mean, even I only have, I think, 2 copies of it. I sold one a few years ago at one of our Palladium open houses, and I was shocked. It just flew out the door for some big bucks. And I'm like, wow. And, so it's rare. But because it's close to our hearts, Matt Ballant just did a Valley of the Pharaoh Kickstarter to do a much bigger, expanded version of the game. And when I say bigger, this was 50 pages and 12 foldouts. I think the book is 224 or 252, something like that. Yeah, and he put a ton of work into it. There's a ton of magic. Now, this is not a Palladium product, but I did give Matt permission to go ahead and do this. I mean, he was the original author. Right. I mean, why not? And he, just really put a ton of work into it again. It was a successful Kickstarter. So watch for it. I'm sure he's going to be offering it online or at conventions and various shows. We may also, buy some and offer them on the Palladium website.
That would be awesome.
So, because I mean, it's just a cool product. And again, Matt just loved it. It's something he's been quietly working on for the last few years. And again, this is the guy who researched 700 weapons for armor. So I think there's more fantasy elements to it, more adventure elements to it. It's a much bigger, fun extravaganza. So keep your eyes out for that.
But that goes back to, I mean, he spent more time refining and expanding and learning from his mistakes with it, and has now come out with Valley of the Pharaohs 2.0 decades later, but it did well. It funded. We wish him luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Matt's a great guy.
Now, our next interview is going to be about the origin of the game that brought me into the Palladium Megaverse, which is Heroes Unlimited. But between Valley of the Pharaohs and Heroes Unlimited, you did a redo of Mechanoids.
Actually, I think, was it just between? It was either just between or came out right after Heroes Unlimited.
Yeah.
And it was simply called The Mechanoids. Wraparound cover by me.
Yeah. That's the familiar Palladium form factor that I was talking about.
Yes, and so that's what I thought I would do. I thought I would make it in a format that people recognized and knew. Expanded the world a little bit. Some of the other elements, there's some cool. I introduced a big, awesome dreadnought that helped even the odds for the human colonists on Gideon E, where they could maybe fight the Mechanoids and bend them themselves and maybe chase the Mechanoids away. So one of the problems, and again, this is like learning from your mistakes. One of the issues that I kept hearing over and over and over with the original Mechanoid trilogy was that, but the first book is such a bummer because the colonists can't win.
Right, and Gideon E gets destroyed.
And Gideon E gets totally annihilated. Yes, I mean, we're not talking like nuclear holocaust on the surface.
No,
I mean, the planet is literally eaten, torn apart, and used for fuel and other things, and all the resources are mined, and the core of the planet's turned into this power crystal that fuels the Mechanoids' giant spaceships, and so it's kind of a bummer. I mean, some of the people on Gideon E, they sneak on to the Mechanoid mothership and live like rats in between the walls. But that didn't resonate with a lot of people either, although some people thought it was, a revolutionary idea. In fact, Matthew Clements, one of my Palladium's ace writer these days, Matthew Clements thinks it's like just this genius idea that nobody has ever done. And I'm like, thank you. And you're right. Not that I'm a genius necessarily, but that as far as I know, no one's really done a story where humans have to survive inside a giant spaceship living in the walls like mice.
Yeah.
And like mice must have to face extermination. Yeah. So my thought was, put it in a format that people recognize, make the story a little bit more positive, and see where it goes. And it didn't really go anywhere. It did okay. I think we printed 6,000 copies and it sold out in 4 or 5 years, but it's just
not the same numbers that you were seeing for like Palladium Fantasy or Heroes Unlimited.
No.
Yeah.
And I think part of it was, again, another lesson, and you see this in film all the time. Mm-hmm. So the Mechanoids has a really passionate, strong core cult fan base.
Yeah.
And so when I departed from the original stuff and made it, well, maybe you can survive this, the original hardcore fans went, oh man, you're changing the story.
Yeah, I came here for the death and despair.
Yes. and so I think they were disappointed by the book, and then new people picked it up and said, it's all right, but it's still full of death and despair. It's not our cup of tea. We want something more uplifting. And I'm like, part of it is just experimenting. We were learning everything. We were flying by the seat of our pants, and we're learning from what we do and from our successes and from our failures. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
So again, we made our money and a profit on that particular book. But, it wasn't a blockbuster, and not everything you're going to do is going to be a blockbuster.
No. However,
yeah, go ahead.
Our next one was a blockbuster for you with the release of Heroes Unlimited.
Yeah, I think I hate to say it, like when you look at certain writers or movie directors, they're kind of one-hit and songwriters, bands. Yeah. Some are one-hit wonders.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lucky, you're George Lucas, whose one-hit wonder is amazing and turns into all these other things and inspires so much and is beyond blockbuster. But most aren't. And I like to think of myself more as Steven Spielberg, where I produced one hit after another. And yeah, after these, modest successes and failures, you just see one hit after another. Heroes Unlimited,
Turtles,
Ninja Turtles, Robotech, Beyond the Supernatural, Ninjas and Super Spies. And then riffs, oddly enough, riffs would sell bigger and better than Robotech and Turtles combined.
Awesome.
It was just they're all mega hits, what I classified as mega hits. But riffs just.
Riffs is the one that blew the lid off of them all.
Yeah, it really did.
Well, Kevin, I can't wait to continue these conversations with you. As I said, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about Heroes Unlimited and Justice Machine.
Yeah.